The ending of Stranger Things has finally arrived, and with it, one of the most devastating questions fans of the series ever imagined they would have to face. Is 11 really dead? After 5 seasons of supernatural adventures, unbreakable friendships, and epic battles against creatures from the Upside Down, the series created by the Duffer Brothers concluded its journey on December 31, 2024, leaving millions of viewers around the world heartbroken, and with a doubt that refuses to disappear. In this video, we will dive deeply into the final events of Stranger Things, analyze every detail surrounding 11's fate, explore fan theories, examine the ambiguous statements made by the creators of the series, and try to answer the question that won't go away. Did the girl with telekinetic powers who captured our hearts back in 2016 truly disappear forever? Or is there still a chance, however small, that she is alive somewhere far away out of everyone's sight? Get ready for a complete and in-depth analysis. This is not just a video about the ending of a TV series, about the closing of an era, about how we choose to deal with loss, and about the power of hope, even in the face of the darkest evidence. Let's begin. Before diving into the devastating finale, it is essential to understand 11's complete journey, from her very first moments in the series to the events that led to the final episode. 11, brilliantly portrayed by Millie Bobby Brown, entered our lives in the first season as a mysterious girl, with a shaved head, fleeing from a secret government laboratory in Hawkins, Indiana. Born Jane Ives, 11 was kidnapped at birth and raised as an experimental subject at the Hawkins National Laboratory, under the cruel command of Dr. Martin Brenner, the man she called Papa, but who was, in reality, her torturer. Through inhumane experiments involving sensory deprivation, psychoactive drugs, and forced training, 11 developed extraordinary psychokinetic abilities. She could move objects with her mind, access the memories and thoughts of other people, and even travel to an intermediate dimension known as the Void. But it was the accident that would change everything. During a particularly intense experiment, 11 inadvertently made psychic contact with a creature from another dimension, the Demogorgon. This contact tore open a portal between our world and the Upside Down, a dark and decaying alternative dimension, infested with hostile creatures and controlled by a malevolent entity known as the Mind Flayer. After escaping the laboratory, 11 found Mike Wheeler and his friends, Dustin Henderson, Lucas Sinclair, and Will Byers. This was the first time in her life that she experienced something she had never had before, true friendship. Mike, in particular, saw beyond 11's powers, beyond her usefulness as a weapon. He saw her as a person, as a friend, and eventually as something much more special. The relationship between Mike and 11 became the emotional heart of the series, a pure and genuine teenage love story, repeatedly tested by extraordinary circumstances. Throughout the 5 seasons, we watched 11 grow from a traumatized and nonverbal child into a strong and determined young woman. She faced the Demogorgon and sealed it inside the Upside Down, sacrificing herself in the process and disappearing for nearly a year. She was taken in by Jim Hopper, the sheriff of Hawkins, who became the father figure she had always deserved. She lost and later regained her powers. She confronted the Mind Flayer multiple times, and she discovered that she had a sister, Kali, also known as 8, another child with psychic powers who escaped from the laboratory. But every victory came with a price. Every use of her powers left her weaker, causing intense nosebleeds, and in extreme cases, leading her to unconsciousness or worse. 11 always knew that her powers were both a blessing and a curse. They gave her the ability to protect the people she loved, but they also turned her into a perpetual target for those who wanted to exploit her abilities. And so we arrive at the 5th season, where everything would finally come to an end. Vecna, revealed as Henry Creel, number 1, the first test subject of Dr. Brenner and the person who originally opened the portal to the Upside Down, emerged as the final villain. Vecna was not merely a creature from the Upside Down, he was a human who became something far worse, someone who wanted to destroy humanity and rebuild the world in his own distorted image. The 5th season was an emotional roller coaster of revelations, epic battles, and painful sacrifices. We saw the characters we loved grow, mature, and face their greatest fears. We saw Hawkins being devastated as the Upside Down began to bleed into our reality. We saw friendships pushed to their limits, and at the center of it all was 11, knowing that one way or another, the fate of the world rested on her shoulders. This brings us to the final episode, a 2-hour epic that promised to close all the stories we had been following for nearly a decade. But no one was prepared for what the Duffer Brothers had in store. The final episode of Stranger Things, titled simply The End, began exactly where the previous episode had ended. With Hawkins practically destroyed, the sky darkened by the invasion of the Upside Down, and our heroes preparing for one last, desperate mission. The plan was ambitious and dangerous: to enter the Upside Down, destroy Vecna once and for all, and then detonate the exotic matter at the core of the portal, permanently sealing the passage between the two dimensions. But before they could execute their plan, something unexpected happened. Kali, number 8, appeared in Hawkins. 11's sister, who had disappeared years earlier after their brief reunion in the second season, returned at the exact moment she was most needed. Kali had been building her own resistance against the forces hunting the laboratory children, and she brought with her vital information. Dr. K, a scientist even more cruel than Dr. Brenner, was obsessed with capturing 11 alive. The reason was disturbing. K had discovered that 11's blood contained unique properties that could be used to create more psychic children, essentially turning 11 into a human breeding farm to produce biological weapons. This revelation changed everything. It was no longer enough to simply defeat Vecna and close the portal. As long as 11 remained alive, she would be eternally hunted, relentlessly pursued, and would never truly know peace or freedom. Kali, Hopper, Mike, and the others tried to find an alternative solution, but 11, with the wisdom and sadness of someone who had carried the weight of the world for far too long, knew the truth. Some problems do not have happy endings. The scenes that followed were filled with an almost unbearable emotional tension. We saw 11 spending her final moments with the people she loved. A silent conversation with Hopper, in which she called him father, for the first time explicitly, thanking him for giving her something she had never had before, a real family. A farewell to her friends, Dustin, Lucas, Will, and especially Max, who had just awakened from her coma after the events of the previous season. 11 held Max's hand, and through her psychic connection, allowed Max to experience happy memories of all of them together, a final gift from one friend to another. But it was with Mike that the farewell was the most devastating. The two young people who fell in love as children and grew up together through unimaginable dangers sat alone together one last time. Mike, always optimistic, always believing there was a way out, begged 11 to reconsider. He presented plan after plan, each one more desperate than the last. They could run away, hide, change their names, live somewhere remote where no one would ever find them. But 11, with tears in her eyes, shook her head. She had learned in the hardest way possible that no matter how far she ran, the danger would always find her. And worse, it would put everyone around her at risk. Then came the moment of the final mission. The group split into teams. Joyce Byers, the mother of Will and Jonathan, who had become a maternal figure to many of the young people, would lead a team to confront Vecna directly. Hopper would lead another team to protect the perimeter and ensure that no one interfered. And 11 and Kali would enter the Upside Down to destroy the core of the portal. But things did not go according to plan. They never do in Stranger Things. As the group prepared to enter the Upside Down, they were ambushed by the Wolfpack unit, an elite military squad commanded by Lieutenant Akers, working directly for Dr. K. Akers was a cold and calculating man, a soldier who followed orders without questioning the morality of his actions. The confrontation was brutal. Gunshots echoed through the night in Hawkins. Hopper, desperate to protect 11, was captured and forced to kneel while Akers pointed a gun at his head, demanding that he reveal 11's location. Hopper, of course, refused. And then, in a moment that shocked every viewer, Akers executed Kali right in front of everyone, a clean shot to the head, to demonstrate that he was serious. Kali's death was the turning point. 11, hidden in the shadows, watched her sister, the only other person in the world who truly understood what it meant to be a human weapon, be murdered in cold blood. Something inside her broke. It was not rage, it was something beyond that. It was a cold and terrible acceptance that this world, this cruel and violent world, would never allow her to live in peace. What happened next was one of the most intense sequences in the entire series. 11 emerged from the shadows and, without saying a single word, used her powers with a ferocity rarely seen before. The soldiers of the Wolfpack unit were thrown around like rag dolls, their bodies slamming into walls and vehicles with crushing force. Akers, realizing too late who he was dealing with, tried to shoot 11, but she simply froze the bullets in midair. Then, in a scene that will be debated by fans for years, 11 used her powers to force Akers to turn his own weapon on himself. It was a dark moment, showing just how far 11 had been pushed. She was no longer the frightened girl from the first season. She had become exactly what Dr. Brenner had always wanted her to be, a lethal weapon. And that realization, visible on her face as she looked at the bodies around her, was the moment she made her final decision. With Callie dead and the attack by the Wolfpack unit repelled, the group finally managed to enter the Upside Down. Time was running out. The exotic matter at the core of the portal was unstable and ready to be detonated. But first, Vecna needed to be destroyed. If he survived the explosion, he would simply rebuild the portal and the entire cycle would begin again. The Upside Down had never looked as terrifying as it did in that final episode. The filmmakers did a magnificent job of creating an atmosphere of imminent death. The sky was blood red, electrical storms tore across the horizon, and the ground pulsed as if it were alive. Creatures from the Upside Down, demogorgons, demodogs, and other aberrations we had seen throughout the seasons, wandered through the ruins of the inverted version of Hawkins. But they did not attack. It was as if they knew that something far greater was about to happen. Joyce's team reached Vecna's location first, the Creel House, or rather, its distorted version in the Upside Down. Vecna was waiting for them. The battle that followed was epic in every sense of the word. Nancy Wheeler, who had become one of the most badass characters in the series, emptied an entire magazine into Vecna. Steve Harrington, armed with his iconic nail-studded baseball bat, fought against the living vines that tried to strangle the group. Robin, ever the strategist, used Molotov cocktails to create walls of fire. Jonathan and Argyle provided support, distracting Vecna and allowing Joyce to get closer. And then the moment came. Joyce Byers, the mother who had spent 5 seasons fiercely protecting her children and any child who needed her, approached Vecna with an axe. In a moment of perfect symbolism, she, who had always represented maternal love standing against the forces of evil, raised the axe and decapitated Vecna. The villain's head rolled across the floor, his eyes still glowing briefly before fading forever. Vecna, number 1, Henry Creel, was finally dead. But the victory was short-lived. Vecna's body began to disintegrate, and with it the entire Upside Down started to collapse. The walls of the Creel house began to crack, vines fell from the ceiling, and the ground started to shake violently. The group needed to get out fast, because the exotic matter would be detonated in 15 minutes, no matter what. Meanwhile, 11 and the rest of the group were at the core of the portal, preparing the exotic matter bomb. Hopper, tears streaming down his face, begged 11 to leave with them. "We won," he shouted over the deafening noise of the collapsing Upside Down. "Vecna is dead. You don't have to do this. You can come home." Mike joined Hopper's pleas, his voice breaking. "Please, El, please. We can find another way. We always find another way." But 11 knew the truth. She looked at the faces of the people she loved and saw something that destroyed her inside. Fear. Not fear of the Upside Down or of Vecna, but fear for her. Fear of what Dr. K would do. Fear of what others like her would do. As long as 11 existed, the people she loved would never truly be safe. They would always be targets, always be used as leverage to control her. That was when 11 did something no one expected. She used her powers to create a psychic barrier, gently but firmly pushing everyone away from the core and toward the exit of the portal. Hopper struggled against the invisible force, screaming her name. Mike was openly crying, pounding his fists against the barrier, begging her to stop. 11 looked at them through the barrier, memorizing every face, every detail. Then she entered Mike's mind. This would be her true farewell. In the shared mental space, far from the chaos of the Upside Down, 11 and Mike met in a peaceful place, the gymnasium of Hawkins Middle School, where they had shared their first kiss years earlier at the winter dance. The conversation between them in that mental space was the most emotionally devastating scene in the entire series. 11 spoke to Mike about all the things she had never been able to properly express. She thanked him for being the first person to see her as a real person, not as a monster or a weapon. She spoke about how he had taught her what it meant to be loved, what it meant to have hope. She said that every moment with him had been a gift, a precious memory she would carry with her, no matter where she was going. Mike, trying to keep his composure and failing miserably, begged her one last time. "Then don't go," he whispered. "Stay with me. We can stay here in this place forever if you want." 11 smiled sadly and shook her head. "You know we can't," she replied. "You've always known, from the beginning. People like me don't get happy endings, Mike, but I can give you one. I can give you a world where you don't have to worry about monsters or about the girl with psychic powers that you loved. You can just live." She asked Mike to promise her something. She asked him to thank the others, Dustin, Lucas, Will, Max, all of them, for the truest friendship she could ever have imagined. She asked him to take care of Hopper, because she knew he would be destroyed. And she asked him to move on, not to let her memory prevent him from living his life fully. And then, as tears streamed down both of their faces, Eleven and Mike kissed one last time. When they pulled apart, 11 whispered 2 words, "Goodbye, Mike." Before he could respond, she pushed him out of the mental connection. Mike returned to his body in the real world, on the other side of 11's psychic barrier. He slammed his fist into the ground in frustration and despair, screaming her name over and over again. Hopper had to physically drag him away as time ran out. The group ran through the portal back into Hawkins, emerging into our world only moments before the detonation. They turned back to look at the portal one last time, and there, on the other side, visible through the rapidly closing opening, stood 11. She was standing calmly, her arms at her sides, looking at them. There was no fear on her face, only peace, a quiet acceptance of her fate. She raised one hand in a final farewell, and then the bomb detonated. A blinding explosion of white light filled the portal. The shockwave threw the group to the ground. When they managed to look again, the portal was closing, tearing at the very fabric of reality as it sealed itself shut. The Upside Down was being destroyed, and with it, everything inside it. Mike ran toward the closing portal, but Hopper held him back. "She's gone," Hopper said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "She's gone, kid. Let her rest." The portal closed completely with a final sound like thunder, and then silence. A deafening silence. The scene was filmed perfectly, with Prince's Purple Rain beginning to play softly. The characters, covered in dirt and blood, simply stood there, staring at the place where the portal had once existed. There was no joy in the victory, only a deep, piercing sadness. They had saved the world, but the cost had been far too high. After the final episode aired, the internet exploded. Fans all over the world took to social media, forums, and comment sections to debate what they had just witnessed. Was 11 truly dead, or had Stranger Things deliberately left the ending open to interpretation? The Duffer Brothers are known for planting subtle clues throughout their narratives, and many viewers believe that the final moments of the series hide more than they initially appear to reveal. The first and most obvious point of debate is the absence of a body. In television and cinema, the rule is simple. If there is no body, there is no confirmed death. 11 is seen inside the Upside Down at the moment of the explosion, but the camera never explicitly shows her being disintegrated. Instead, the scene cuts away at the peak of the blast, focusing on the emotional reactions of the characters on the other side of the portal. For many fans, this was a deliberate choice, not a coincidence. Another detail that caught the attention of the audience is the way 11 looks in her final moments. She is not screaming, running, or trying to escape. She stands still, calm, almost serene. This is radically different from how other characters have faced death in the series. Some viewers interpret this as acceptance, while others believe it suggests something else entirely, that 11 knew something the others did not. There is also the matter of 11's powers. Throughout the series, we have seen her survive situations that should have been impossible. She has opened and closed interdimensional gates, entered and exited minds, and even manipulated reality within the mental plane. In earlier seasons, 11 was able to access a void-like space where she could observe people across vast distances. Some fans theorize that at the moment of the explosion, she may have used her powers to escape into that psychic plane, or into another dimension altogether. The dialogue between 11 and Mike also deserves close attention. When 11 says, "People like me don't get happy endings," she may not be saying that she is about to die, but rather that she cannot exist in the normal world anymore. Her sacrifice could be symbolic, representing the death of 11 as a part of that world, not necessarily the end of her existence. This interpretation gains strength when we consider that the Upside Down itself was created as a reflection of trauma and pain, elements deeply connected to 11's past. Another clue lies in the final shots of Hawkins. After the portal closes, the town begins to heal. The sky clears, the tremors stop, and for the first time since Season 1, Hawkins looks peaceful. Some fans argue that this peace comes not only from Vecna's death, but from 11's departure. As long as she existed in that world, the supernatural would always find its way back to her. The creators themselves added fuel to the fire in post-finale interviews. While they never explicitly confirmed 11's death, they repeatedly used ambiguous language. Phrases like the end of 11's journey and her final choice were carefully chosen. When asked directly whether 11 was dead, the Duffer Brothers avoided a clear answer, instead emphasizing the emotional truth of the ending rather than its literal meaning. Finally, there is the theme that has always been at the heart of Stranger Things: growing up. Each season represented a stage of childhood and adolescence, and Eleven's arc mirrors that progression. Her final act can be seen as the ultimate step into adulthood, not through survival, but through self-sacrifice. Whether she lived or died may be less important than what she represents: the moment when innocence is lost and responsibility takes its place. So, after analyzing every scene, every line of dialogue, and every visual clue, we return to the question that brought us here in the first place. Did 11 really die at the end of Stranger Things? From a strictly narrative point of view, the series strongly suggests that yes, 11 is dead. Her sacrifice follows the classic structure of a heroic ending. She says goodbye, she makes peace with her fate, and she gives her life to save the people she loves and the world they live in. The explosion of the portal is presented as absolute and final, destroying the Upside Down entirely. There is no post-credits scene, no hidden hint showing her survival. The story, as it is told on screen, ends with her disappearance. Emotionally, the show treats Eleven's fate as a death. The characters mourn her. Hopper, especially, is portrayed as a broken man in the final moments, someone who has lost a daughter for the second time. Mike's grief is raw and unresolved. The absence she leaves behind is permanent and heavy, not temporary. The series does not frame her sacrifice as something that can be undone or reversed. However, Stranger Things has always operated in the space between certainty and mystery. The show is deeply inspired by 1980s science fiction, a genre famous for ambiguous endings, unseen survivals, and characters who transcend the limits of reality. Within that tradition, Eleven's death is never shown directly, and that matters. The lack of a definitive visual confirmation leaves the door open, even if only slightly, for alternative interpretations. It is also important to consider the meta-narrative. The Duffer Brothers have stated multiple times that they wanted the ending to feel earned, emotional, and definitive, but also meaningful. Killing 11 outright is one way to achieve that. Allowing her to transcend the physical world, to exist somewhere beyond Hawkins, beyond the Upside Down, is another. In both cases, the result is the same for the characters left behind. 11 is gone from their lives. Perhaps the most honest answer is this: 11 died as a part of the world we followed for 5 seasons. Whether her consciousness survived somewhere else is ultimately irrelevant to the story being told. Her arc is complete. Her purpose was fulfilled. She broke the cycle of violence, ended the connection between worlds, and gave her friends the chance to live normal lives. The final moments of the series reinforce this interpretation. We see the characters moving forward, slowly, painfully, but inevitably. Hawkins begins to rebuild. Life continues. 11 does not return, does not appear as a vision, does not speak again. Her story is remembered, not continued. In that sense, Stranger Things delivers a mature and bittersweet ending. It tells us that not every hero gets to enjoy the peace they create. Some heroes exist only to make the world better for others, and then they fade away. So, did 11 die? Yes. In the way that matters most, she did. And that is what makes her story unforgettable. The story of 11 is above all a story about identity, belonging, and choice. From the very first season, she was a child who had everything taken from her: her name, her family, her childhood, and who slowly learned what it meant to be human. She learned how to love, how to trust, how to be vulnerable. And in the end, she made the most human choice of all. She chose others over herself. Whether viewers interpret her fate as death, transcendence, or something in between, the emotional truth remains the same. 11's journey reached its natural conclusion. She was no longer running, no longer hiding, no longer being used as a weapon. She acted on her own terms, guided not by fear or anger, but by love. Stranger Things began as a story about strange occurrences in a small town, but it evolved into something much deeper. It became a story about friendship, sacrifice, and the pain of growing up. 11 stood at the center of that story, not because of her powers, but because of her heart. Her final act reflects the core message of the series, that love is the strongest force of all, even stronger than monsters from another world. As the screen fades to black and the music swells, we are left with a quiet sadness, but also with gratitude. Gratitude for a character who changed the lives of everyone around her, and for a story that trusted its audience enough to end without easy answers. The absence of 11 is painful, but it is also meaningful. It reminds us that some endings are meant to stay with us, to make us reflect, and to hurt a little. In the end, 11's legacy is not defined by how she died, or if she died at all, but by how she lived. By the friendships she formed, the courage she showed, and the hope she gave to a world that desperately needed it. And that is why, long after the final episode ends, her story continues to resonate. If you made it this far, thank you for watching until the end. Stories like this only exist because of people who truly care about the details, the emotions, and the meaning behind them. If this video helped you see Stranger Things and 11's story from a new perspective, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future deep dives, analyses, and long-form stories like this one. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe 11 really died, or do you think her story continues somewhere beyond what we saw on screen? Leave your opinion in the comments. I read every single one, and your perspective might be featured in a future video. And if you know someone who loves Stranger Things as much as you do, share this video with them. These stories are even more powerful when they're experienced together. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next story.